Welcome back. iFaith message 60. 60 out of probably about 130. This is on 2 John. We've been going through the letters of the Apostle John. We had one called Walk the Walk, and we saw that walking in the light isn't sinlessness, but it does mean we're making an effort to walk as Jesus walked. And then we had a talk on the burden that's not a burden from 1 John 5. And yet we didn't actually identify the core issue, the problem that John is dealing with in the letters of 1 and 2 John. And so we will be getting into that today. 2 John 7 says, "Many deceivers have gone out into the world. Those who do not confess Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist." Which means, if I read it correctly, any one of us could be the Antichrist if we deny that Jesus has come in the flesh. The concept of Antichrist is not found in the book of Revelation. Most people think it is. It's not to be found there. It's only in 2 John and 1 John. So let's look at a couple of passages in 1 John. "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world." That's in 1 John 4. When he says many spirits, spirit can be a synonym for a prophetic message. You'll see that also in 2 Thessalonians 2. So a prophet's message here is identified with a spirit. I know it's unusual terminology, but that's what we have faced here. He continues, "By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus, biblically, is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard was coming and is now in the world already." So already in the late first century, the spirit of the Antichrist is in the world. So I often meet people who predict, or maybe they don't make predictions, but they say, look at the news, look at the weather, this must be the last days. It must be the final period. And people have been saying that since the first century, maybe before, as far as I know. But it could be, probably not, but it could be. But many false prophets and the spirit of the Antichrist, that's plagued the church for 2 millennia. And one other passage in 1 John 2:18, "Children, it is the last hour. And as you've heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. Therefore, we know that it is the last hour." So this issue of the Antichrist is focused on in 1 and 2 John. And we need to figure out what was wrong with it. What was anti-Christian about it? But you notice he says, many Antichrists have come. He also says, as you've heard, Antichrist is coming. I think in the past I've tended to look at that as saying, well, there is no Antichrist, it's just a large number of Antichrists. But this passage, I would admit, could suggest that there is one very important figure who's the Antichrist. If so, would that have been one of the Roman emperors in the first century? Would it have been a political figure in later centuries or still yet to come? I don't know. But you'll find plenty of people who will tell you the answer because they know, or they think they do. So in 1 and 2 John, the key issue is Gnosticism. Gnosticism begins with a G, but it's not pronounced Gnosticism. Gnosticism is the central theological issue in the epistles of 1 and 2 John. The Gnostics use similar vocabulary to Christians, but the terms have very different meanings. You remember in 2 Corinthians, Paul warns them not to receive a different Jesus or a different spirit or a different gospel. And you'd say, well, sure, there's only one gospel and one Jesus and one spirit. Well, even in the time of 2 Corinthians, that's in the 50s, AD, 50s in the first century, they had people already inventing new Jesuses. And that's pretty much what the Gnostics did. They believed that matter was evil. The creator God, the Old Testament God, was evil. He created a physical world, subject to suffering, illness, death, and spirit is higher and better than matter. course, this is not biblical. Biblically, matter is important. It's not bad. And the opposite of spiritual isn't material. The opposite of spiritual is unspiritual. But they said that matter is evil in your own body. It doesn't really matter. Your body, there were two takes. One was that your body doesn't matter, so you can have all the pleasure and thrills you want. But probably most of the Gnostics didn't conclude that. They said the body is evil, and we need to keep it down with harsh rules, lots of rules. They taught that the biblical God was inferior to the true deity. That is, the God of the Old Testament, you should not follow him, but the true high God is way up, many levels up. And if you can understand their complex systems and thinking, you can be enlightened. And for them, enlightenment is intellectual and mystical, more than moral or practical. Or let me connect this to 1 John 1. For them, walking in the light would mean having a certain awareness of the Gnostic doctrines, which the other Christians don't have. They would disagree that walking in the light means you have to walk the way Jesus did, or that your sins are being forgiven, because for them, sin's not the problem, ignorance is the problem. If this starts to sound familiar, no surprise, because there are many Gnostics today. The New Age movement, so-called, is Gnostic, and other groups are even more explicitly Gnostic. And this heresy is touched on in various New Testament books. Something's going on in Colossians and in 1 Timothy. So it's not just the Johns. 2 John has been called 1 John in miniature. So if you took the parts of 1 John that focus on the world and loving and obeying, Antichrist, Jesus coming in the flesh, if you took all of that and distilled it, you would end up with 2 John. I think that's true. Now, let's read 2 John 7-9. Many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Be on your guard, so that you do not lose what we have worked for, but may receive a full reward. Everyone who does not abide in the teaching of Christ, but goes beyond it, does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. So we need to abide. We need to remain in his teaching. That doesn't mean that you need to fill your study with Christian books and Bibles. We remain in his teaching when his teaching remains in us. It's about doing what he said. And we shouldn't go beyond. Sometimes curiosity can be a bad thing. Usually it's a good thing, but sometimes it's a bad thing, and we can end up going way beyond. See, these Gnostics, their focus was not Jesus' focus. Their values and priorities were not his. The false teachers denied that Jesus came in the flesh. They had no problem with the Son coming to earth, but they thought he was more like a phantom. He had no mass. Just one Gnostic gospel, very late, amusing in some senses. But when Jesus is born, he's pure light and he weighs nothing. He's completely weightless because they thought matter was bad. The Gnostics were down on matter. They were very down on the Old Testament. They were down on sex. They were down on pleasure. Really wonderful people to hang out with, I guess, for a few minutes. But they denied the incarnation. And first, the Gospel of John 1:14 begins with the incarnation. The Word became flesh. Colossians 2:9, the fullness of divinity, of Godhead or Godhood became, came to dwell in Christ. So this is the spirit of the Antichrist. Not just one person necessarily. Early heretics, interestingly, tended to accept Jesus' divinity, but not his humanity. Let me say that again, because that's pretty important. In the early centuries of Christianity, many people were quite happy to add Jesus to their pantheon of gods. They had no problem believing that he was a spirit, or he was real, or he came, or he was divine in some measure, maybe an angel. But they had a real difficult time grasping that he would have been a man, he would have been human, he would have had a physical body. In modern days, we falsely imagine that back then people were gullible, and that's really not fair. Back then, the struggle was to believe he was human. Today, our struggle is to believe he's divine. Let's not read our issues back into what we're reading there. And then he says, we mustn't run ahead of the teachings of Christ. And that's what the Antichrist is doing. They're taking the teaching of Christ and they're redefining them and they're building and they're trying to create something new, but it's not valid. It's false. He says also, I'm going to read one last passage here. Well, two last passages. Now I ask you, not as though I were writing a new commandment, but one we've had from the beginning, let us love one another. This is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you've heard it from the beginning. You must walk in it. Because see the connection again between love and walking? And you might say, well, how does that connect with the Antichrist? How does that connect with these false teachers? Well, they again thought that the point was to be enlightened, not to obey. It was to deal with ignorance, not sin. And that should explain it. See, the problem is if we love the world rather than loving one another, we've got a wrong concept of Jesus. And the view that he's a mere spirit, not really one of us, that kind of view reinforces the idea that we can live as we please as long as we are religious. In other words, it compartmentalizes religion. You have your private life, your professional life, here's your religious life, confined to a few minutes each week. But true love for God means we obey him. And although it may not feel natural in our church culture, in biblical culture, obedience and love are absolutely inseparable. Keeping Jesus' commandments also makes us more loving. And that makes sense because many of his commands are about relationships with others. So what to do? Well, I've got 4 things for you, but sorry, it doesn't spell anything. First, we need to understand the incarnation as a central doctrine of Christianity, that God the Father sends God the Son, that God takes on flesh, fully human, fully divine, but also fully human. To deny this doctrine is to deny Christ. It's so central. And the word is very strong, but the word Antichrist in 1st and 2nd John is applied to those who deny that doctrine. Second, we have to understand false teaching. We need to understand Gnosticism. This Gnosticism, which is resurgent in the modern New Age movement, which has been going on for maybe since the late 1800s, but especially since the 1960s. We should understand the Gnosticism that he's dealing with. And third, let's draw the line where God draws the line. I mean, we need to accept these tough verses. There are people who deny the incarnation. And this says they don't have God. Who denies the incarnation? Well, obviously, Muslims would deny that. Unitarians, Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe some other groups. And John actually says, don't welcome them. Don't bring them into your home. It'll contaminate everything. I'm not saying I wouldn't invite a Jehovah's Witness into my home to have a talk, but we're talking about having them into our home as a guest speaker in our home church, our house church. Don't have them in that way. In terms of hospitality, be kind, of course, to everybody, but we're not pretending everything's just okay. John says, don't receive into the house or welcome anyone who comes to you and doesn't bring this teaching. For to welcome is to participate in the evil deeds of such a person. Wow. So we need to be careful. And I hope you'll ponder this and not just say, okay, I only have people from my tribe visiting my house. But let's not do that. But we need to be aware that when someone has an anti-Christian agenda, and this can influence us and others and cause trouble, we need to be wise. They can influence our thinking. And notice that these aren't just false teachers. They're not just people who they're confused on one topic. John treats them as false Christians. Of course, we all make errors. No one has arrived. But when the central Christian doctrines are discarded or distorted, salvation is in jeopardy. Oh, number 4. Despite temptations to run ahead, to speculate, to study more philosophy and theology than you're ready for, you haven't built the biblical base yet. Don't do that. Let's remain with the gospel message. Well, there's much more wisdom in this short letter. Even at the very end, we learn that communication is best done in person. Much better than a letter or a phone call even. Much better than an email. But we're going to stop there. I'll let you find the other cool stuff. Next time, we'll be in 3 John, and the topic is, the first will be last.